So our plan here is to end, but we'll leave time also for questions to the audience, right? In about 35 minutes. And this one is kind of a very unstructured session. It's really up to the speakers here to really decide what they want to talk about. But the overall really is the general question of what does the future hold? What's nice is we have people with different disciplines, so we look at the world differently. So I'm just going to ask people, and there's no set structure here. You could speak as much or as little as you want, but maybe let's get started with let's see. So Eli, why don't you get started on it, and we're just going to arbitrarily run through people here. So what does the future hold that you think this audience would care about?
I think so far today, we haven't talked about how much the patient side of things and their relationship with the physicians change. Yeah. So we saw some of Doug's slides of this, much more via telemedicine, much more patient-directed care, websites where a patient can essentially click to order. There's some controls on that, of course, but a patient can get much closer to the prescription on their own now than ever before. Some of the biggest products this year are dispensed almost entirely at a CVS or another retail site. Patients are now going to One Medical, which is an Amazon subsidiary now. So patients are getting an enormous amount of their medical care from tech companies, which was not happening a couple of years ago. So we could probably pull on all of those threads, but we've talked a lot about what the pharma industry is doing. Historically, it's been now you go, you educate a physician, they make a prescribing decision. It's now getting much more complex about where those physicians are, how they spend their time, how they're interacting with patients, and who's really influencing their decisions.
Yeah. And that's a structural problem too, because, just example of a physician is that because the new laws really favored the hospitals, and so they could charge more, make more money, but the regulations affected all doctors regardless of it's just driving all the independent doctors out of business because they can't make money, plus the insurance requirements now of lawsuits, and it's driving them all to end up working for a salary at a hospital, which is not a good thing. Right. And a lot of pressure from lots of patients in a short period of time, which is burning out the primary physicians, right? We're losing primary physicians at a very alarming rate. So there's
plus they're getting old.
Plus they're getting
older and saying,
And
it's
more complex therapies.
Yes, it's not worth it. So arbitrarily, Doug, you're next.
No, I mean that whole issue, it brings up the whole issue of staffing shortages. So if you're going to treat people closer to home, how do you get these people to treat people closer to home? So I know that a lot of these home healthcare, they're having staffing issues in hospitals, staffing issues with doctors, and that's a big concern. Now, the other big concern of mine is that Rite Aid just went bankrupt.
Yes.
You have CVS closing 300 stores a year for 3 years. Walgreens closing stores. And I mentioned this stuff about independents don't want to fill GLP-1 prescriptions because they lose money.
Yeah.
So it's it's kind of a prelude to a wake up call, because how long is that going to last? With what might be $100 billion category, you're just going to want to dismiss these things.
Dr. Stein, what will the future bring?
I can honestly say I have no idea. Well, I think we're seeing, I think the future is going to bring what the past has already sort of teed up in a way, which is, I think, a lot of things that are going to have a huge impact when we're looking at. AI is the latest and probably the greatest, but a lot of the changes in how research is done and how drug discovery has occurred have accelerated over the years. It's not, when you look at these things, it's not like we're all of a sudden, last year popping out all of these new things. I think about, I think we have to think about how these are going to impact our environment. we were talking before about AI, and and I was thinking about this sort of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, which is the problem is that the quality of data that we're putting under the microscope isn't necessarily always fit for purpose. I mean, we have a healthcare system that was commenting, it's just fraction and not integrated, not well organized. And that means that there's massive amount of data out there on healthcare interactions that either isn't captured or is captured in a very incomplete, inaccurate way, which means that you're applying these huge, powerful engines to make associations, which is, at least as I understand it, what largely we're doing across multiple different databases. And the quality and the extent of the data available, it's much more limited than it should be. And in other regions, it's better than in the US, but that may drive, one could hope that would drive us to a clinical kind of enterprise where we can capture much better data, quality data, by having more standardized formats and more integrated systems, which could be, and if that happened, which I don't see a huge, I see a lot of people who are trying to do that, and some large healthcare systems are making more progress. But if you could do that, I mean, then you have these engines that can, look at associations across genetic and phenotypic and disease, natural history, and then you have data that actually could be focused on, and the amount of information you get would be absolutely remarkable. I mean, I perfectly agree. We're not going to start doing trials in computers to see if drugs work, but on the other hand, the amount of information that you can glean and model could allow for sort of this enterprise modeling and simulation to design trials to determine whether drugs are likely to work, what manifestations will be impacted, how and change the whole nature of how you decide what to do, what to put your drug in to try to treat. I mean, you should be able to, at some point in 10 or 15 years, have a drug, put it into a model, figure out exactly what the likely manifestations will improve, how quickly they'll improve, how much they'll improve, and then pop out a protocol that is designed to assess exactly that, and then put it in patients.
Yeah.
And that cuts out potentially a huge amount of time. And then the analytic approaches can, with adaptive designs, Bayesian approaches, means we could go from, the concept of a drug, perhaps designed using AI engines and other ways, to a drug that is available, manufactured using efficient approaches, put into a trial, all done in the course of 2 or 3 years instead of a 5 or 10 year process. And then an output of data that could be packaged into a regulatory submission in much shorter order. And on our side, we'll have to be thinking, how do we look at data? How do we analyze what's submitted to us using these tools? And can we accelerate how we do that? Sure, the answer is that there will be efficiencies that would generate. Right now, we think about a drug going from concept to approval over the course of 10 or 15 years often. Can that be 5 years? Can we do that in 5 or 6 years? And probably, and in a much more direct way. We also drop out 90% of drugs that are coming into the test system, right? Well, I mean, if we have better ways of simulating and understanding how drugs are likely to work and safety things might occur, can we pick drugs better? Can we get that to 20 or 30 or 40% of candidates that are coming into phase 1 coming out in a way that they can be approvable, which would reduce costs tremendously. So I think the future is how do we put all of this together to have a system that actually is much more efficient, much shorter in development time, and leading to the selection of much better effective therapies. So,
And that can only be a positive thing for the FDA, right? Because it will allow you to review a lot more drugs than it can, because you're capacity constrained because of the way you have to do it today. Right?
and as long as you fund for more staffing, we're fine.
Yeah. Well, no, if they give you more funds and it's more efficient, that would be a win-win, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Dr. Spielberg?
I'm going to put another hat on. As a retired medical school dean, and it came from your comments. Medical school was interesting until a few years ago. It was 2 years of gross anatomy and no physiology because Claude Bernard had not done his thing yet, and we weren't studying physiology, nor were we studying anything else. I have a pharmacopoeia from 1736 from London. That is my prized possession. That pharmacopoeia was still in use in British hospitals in London in the late 1800s from the margin notes. No new drugs from 1736 to 1885. Okay. We face a very different challenge and a very different sociology now about teaching students. I have colleagues who quit practice when electronic records came out because they didn't know how to type and weren't going to learn. Sounds funny. In my neighborhood in Philadelphia, you couldn't find an ENT surgeon because of that. They all quit. They were all getting older. They didn't want to learn how to do electronic records. So, and what we teach in medical school, the volume of just plain data and information has gone up, but you don't, with things like AI, you don't need to memorize every last metabolic pathway. You're probably going to hit a button that'll tell you, and bam, there it is. But we don't teach our students how to do that. We don't teach our students, and we didn't do a very good job when the pandemic hit, how to do virtual visits. No one knew how to do a virtual visit. No one was there to help physicians to do virtual visits, or visiting nurses, or pharmacists for that matter. So I think we have a huge challenge ahead, but therein is the opportunity. Medicine is not going to be what it was like when I started. It's not going to be like when my son started 10 years ago. It has changed dramatically, and we're not teaching the skills that are going to be necessary to translate all the stuff we're talking about into benefit for patients. And that's what this game is about. I mean, we're trying to help real people. And I don't have any real wisdom about this, but I think in addition to gene jockeys, computer jockeys, and everybody else, we need sociologists, we need teachers, we need psychologists, we need people out there in the real world who are interacting with patients. One of my former PhD students, the veterinarian, who is now the dean of medicine at Tufts, and he said his students, because of COVID, now can't work in groups. They were home, and you put them together in an anatomy lab, and they don't know how to talk to each other. That's how fast things are changing. And we were totally unprepared for this. I blame myself as well. I mean, the deans used to get together once a year, and we had our cry-a-thon about how hard it was being a medical school dean. But these weren't the things we were talking about. And I think we need educators and psychologists and sociologists and physicians working together if we're going to save the system. Because, to me, the greatest sin of all of this would be to have the greatest drugs on God's earth, and we can't use them because we can't afford them, or because we don't know how to talk to our patients about them. One thing about cost: cystic fibrosis is a Northern European disease, okay? Sickle cell anemia is an African disease. And we always used to talk about, why is all the money going to CF? Well, part of it was that there were the parent organizations and everything else. And part of it was the biology. And yet sickle cell anemia was the first disease that Linus Pauling figured out what the mutation was 1,000 years ago. So we should have been way ahead. The drug that we're talking about to do gene editing right now is approximately $2 million a patient. There are 100,000 patients in the United States with sickle cell anemia. There are more than close to 10 million patients, heavily in the third world, with sickle cell anemia. it's too many zeros. I don't know how many, quintillion you end up with, but you end up with probably greater than the world's GNP
Yeah, to try to pay for it.
to try to pay
So
for it.
Peter, think of it this way. So I got my start in pharmaceutical land, and there was brands, and there was generics, and there was vaccines.
Yeah.
Then you had biologics.
Yeah.
Come along. You had specialty. You have specialty light. You got biosimilars. And now you got rare disease and cell and gene therapy.
Yep.
You know, kind of like 9 different archetypes. Now, as we go from left to right, you're going to smaller patient populations.
Yeah.
And, you know, the challenge is how do you spread the cost of innovation or for a few people? That's, and then how do you expect, you know, society to, you know, pay for it?
So I think when we put our group together, we need some health economists.
Well, you know, if I take an even bigger picture view of all of this, the reality is one of the big concerns about the US economy and incomes is how competitive we are. And we have the most expensive healthcare cost per person in the world, but we're 27th in terms of ranking of actual well-being. And so, you know, and if you look at some of the countries between 1 and 26, it's kind of alarming that you know that we're at 27. And part of the problem is really an even like a bigger picture problem than what we're talking about here, which is that we haven't tackled imperfections in how the system operates. Right? You know, they're not looking at how costs occur at hospitals and all these things. Instead, you know, what's the old phrase, which is unintended consequences? They keep passing bills that maybe have one intention, but it has all 20 unintended consequences.
Inflation.
The other.
There you go.
I know, I mean, 340B is one of the biggest perversions of our time.
Yeah,
But it's
but the
Yeah,
but the other is that often they're looking at the wrong end of the telescope. So look, there are people who love Obamacare, but people who hate it. The reason why I'm very disappointed in Obamacare is that it wasn't an insurance. It's not an insurance problem. It's a cost problem, the system cost problem. And it's sort of like, you know, Winfred Opry, you know, gave away a bunch of cars, you know, to some people in the audience once, right? But she didn't give Mercedes away. You know, she gave away Tauruses. Why? But, you know, so the analogy would be, okay, we'll make an insurance, but what we're trying to, we never try to reduce the cost of the car. We just try to give more insurance to the, but it's the wrong end of the telescope. And I think someone has to take a look at the whole system, but in a thoughtful way, figure out how to eliminate the things that are causing costs to escalate without a patient benefit, right? Without a patient benefit. I don't mind thinking about costs that may go up with as a patient benefit. I don't mind that. That's what's reasonable. But costs that go up where there's no patient benefit, where you could do something about it, I have a problem with that. And I think this country, and it's just poor government. I mean, they don't understand the healthcare system. And Doug, I know this is one of your favorite topics, right? They don't understand the healthcare system and why it isn't working. And they just keep looking at the wrong end of the telescope, and they keep putting in new laws that fix one thing over here, but then create 5 other problems over there. And until they grapple it, and the drug industry is only part of that system, right?
well, you think about, you know, these are 26-year-old kids writing this legislation.
Yeah.
They don't take drugs.
Yeah,
They don't take prescription drugs.
yeah, exactly.
Now, the other part, which
And
you comment about
they haven't been sick yet. And they don't have children.
Obamacare, you know, which was only 17% of the new lives came from the exchanges. 83% came from Medicaid expansion.
Mhm.
So nobody could afford the exchange unless you're subsidizing, which is to the point we were making about.
Yeah, I know you feel very strongly about this this topic, right?
I feel strongly about a lot of times.
By the way, I want to have a wonderful time, have dinner with Doug. Absolutely, but he's very thoughtful, so I really appreciate it.
But my wife doesn't like me getting these things. She had fun.
So the future, I guess, is kind of mixed, right? You know, there's some really good things happening. And there's some things not so good happening, but not necessarily solutions, you know, being developed to solve it. And I almost feel like the guy who, you know, whenever there was a dramatic change, right, industry. So when they came out with cars and they were interviewing the guy who was the leading producer of buggies, Ford buggy. He said, aren't you worried about cars? He said, no, we're just going to make horses go faster. And sometimes, you know, when I read what some politicians say, I said, he just wants to make horses go faster, right? So everyone's entitled to a parting comment about what the future brings, and it can be a couple sentences, it could be one word, it could be a paragraph, whatever it is. We'll start on we start on one end and go this way.
I'm not as worried about innovation as I am worried about how we take it.
Good point. You stole my point. Dr. Stein?
Well, I certainly would agree with that. I was going to make come about unintended consequences since we're almost finished with the meeting. I was looking, you get the news reports and I was every day, like, you know, things that impact the regulation for our industry. And so I saw we approved tirzepatide yesterday for weight loss in general. And there's a New York Times discussion of that apparently the food and restaurant industry is now looking at the impact on them because of it. And so when you talk about unintended, I sent that to my division director who approved it, saying, see what you did? I mean, you know.
Get a call from friends on the nursing board once we talk about GMP.
Yeah, right.
So benefit risk, you know, the benefit is contextual, the risks are contextual. So there you go. How large a framework, but no, I think the next 10 years is going to be incredibly exciting time. So
Yeah.
Looking at what the opportunities are, I'm just really excited about what the future holds.
And I'm too on the innovation side.
On the innovation.
I just worry about
Well,
the
that's
cost and the system inside. Eli?
Yeah, we looked back a while ago at what drove pharma company performance over the past 30 years. And 30 years ago, I believe there were 17 public pharma companies and total revenue in the $30 billion range. And now we have over 2,000 public pharma companies, $2 trillion industry. And a lot of the challenges that we've talked about, pricing, genericization, those have come in and out over time, manufacturing challenges. But the industry's grown consistently. We've added geographies, we've added patients, we've added medication. Now we're at the point, so we haven't really had to address a lot of these concerns. I agree, Doug. I think you had -2 to 1% growth over the past couple of years in an industry that's used to like 7 or 8% growth. And so I think that we're entering the period where things are going to really start to look different than they have historically, and not necessarily in bad ways, but just different from the old model of more medication to more people.
Dr. Spielberg?
So I'm a pediatrician, so I have to be optimistic. That's, my colleagues know going into pediatrics, we're on the bottom of the economic heap in medicine, and we're the happiest. Says something, because it's all about our patients and not about us. I just hope going forward that adding AI to our rather poorly developed computer systems in our brains, we can in fact not only get smarter, but get wiser and look at things rather directly, rather honestly about where the impediments are. And since we can't boil the ocean, start working on some of those impediments and begin getting progress made. We talk past each other all the time. That's why these sessions really fun. I learned a lot, and we got to do more of this. And we really need to bring people together from disparate backgrounds. But ultimately, it's all about our patients. And the happiest thing and the thing that makes me most confident has been the organization of patient groups, parent groups. At the pediatric meeting I was at in Washington, every panel had a parent with a chronically sick child to keep us honest, to keep the focus where it needs to be. And I think if we do that, we'll do okay.
My comment, so I won't repeat what everyone else says, which I agree with, is on the financial side. It's my hope that this very dysfunctional financing system for biotechs, et cetera, gets fixed. Because this feast or famine system is disastrous. If you're a company, the same technology, but you happen to have moved into clinical trials on the wrong year, it's a disaster, right? It shouldn't be that way. So somewhere, someone in the government, whatever, ought to sort of try to find a way to even out, right? It's the severity that peaks of the problem, right? I don't mind if it goes like this, but it's the severity. And because right now, there are some very, very good companies, biotech companies, who have drug candidates, et cetera, that should see the light of day, should be coming up, and they're getting killed, right? So somehow, and that's not every industry goes through this. There's something very peculiar about the drug industry and biotech that suffers through this, and so somehow we need to put our heads together, get the right people together to try to see if we can create something that would buffer. The other is, of course, that I happen to agree with everyone about the cost issue, and the analogy would be if the technology industry were doing the kind of stuff we're doing in healthcare, a cell phone would cost $50,000, right? Right. So so
TVs.
pardon?
TVs.
Yeah, that's right, or TVs or whatever. If you go across so many different industries, the price goes down, and not only that, the products improve, right? So the TV today from 20 years ago, but it costs less to buy a 55-inch TV today than 10 years ago, and yet it's like 50 times better, right? So we need to do that, and I think that's also true in the government system. I mean, Doug, you and I bored Doug on this over dinner too, which is, we have a government system that was designed to do a half decent job managing about 2 million people in 13 states. And yet we never have changed the structure of the federal government. And whereas you think about it, in 1776, the only form of business was self-proprietorship and a partnership. That was it, right? But as time went on, as companies got bigger, you could never have a General Motors or whatever using a partnership, right? But because there was a structural innovation to create corporations and so forth, it allowed those companies to act, to operate efficiently at a larger scale. We've never done that with the government. And the consequences of one is we have a dysfunctional government. And it also has caused the president to have more power because the House and the Senate lost power because they can't make decisions fast enough, right? See, the government system we had was okay because you could take 3 weeks to decide whether to declare war because it took that long for a ship to go across the Atlantic, right? Now, that's not true. So I think we need somehow to make some improvements in the system because that's what's creating all these problems, right? Which is we can't get to the right laws and the right legislation because of the way that it operates. But I don't feel very strongly about this.
I can tell.
Well, look, on that note, we've gone all the way through all this. First of all, I want to thank our panelists and speakers for the wonderful speeches that all of you have given today. I hope those who are online and those people who are here in person felt we had no attrition in people, which is a miracle. Usually we lose half the people by 4 o'clock. But I hope you found it very, very, very helpful. Right? But I want to really thank all of you who've attended, and particularly the speakers, who I can tell kind of enjoyed it as well, right? And we'll see all of you in a year. And of course, if you have anything you want to discuss, talk to anyone here, depending on the topic. So thank you very much, and thank you for attending.
Thank you.